You have been listening to iSermon with Father Theodore Paraskevopoulos. For more information on Saints Constantine and Helen Greek Orthodox Church, please visit www.stsconstantineandhelen.com. This has been a listener-supported presentation of Ancient Faith Radio.
The Ancient Faith for the Modern World. This is Ancient Faith Radio.
Welcome to Healthy Minds, Healthy Souls with your hosts, Father Nicholas and Dr. Roxanne Lowe, where we will connect our Orthodox faith to day-to-day living in relationship to our family, our work, and our view of our is the priest at St. John the Divine Greek Orthodox Church in Jacksonville. And Dr. Roxanne is a licensed clinical psychologist who uses her extensive training in private practice. Your questions are welcome by calling 855-237-2346. That's 855-237-2346. Here now is Father Nicholas and Dr. Roxanne.
Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to Healthy Minds, Healthy Souls. Christ is risen. Truly, He is risen. As many of you know, during these 40 days following Easter, that's just the way that we greet each other as Orthodox Christians, is the same words that we hear from the myrrh-bearing women when they find that the tomb is empty, that Christ is risen. So what a joyful season that we're in. And so we're so excited that you're all taking the time to join us this evening. We are, if you're joining us through our Facebook Live messages on Healthy Minds, Healthy Souls through Ancient Faith Radio, or if you are tuning in through your through the website, the Ancient Faith website, or whatever means that you're tuning in, we're just grateful that you've taken the time to be with us. My name is Father Nicholas Lowe, and I'm joined by my lovely wife, Roxanne Lowe. And Roxanne, as many of you know, is a psychologist here in Jacksonville, Florida. She has her PhD in psychology, and I am a priest here serving at St. John the Divine Greek Orthodox Church. And so in a few moments, we're going to begin having part two of our show that I hope and I pray will be encouraging and inspiring for all of you. But I just want to give a quick announcement. Many of you already know this because you were tuning in last week on our Healthy Minds, Healthy Souls Facebook page. But last Thursday, May 7th, we had a huge announcement. And we announced that we have joined together once again with Ancient Faith to publish a book that we have spent, I tell you, I think, Roxanne, 3 or maybe even more, 4 years working on. It's been a collaborative effort of both Roxanne's work and mine. It's faith and psychology together. And it'll be coming out this October. We will share more with you as time goes on. Hopefully, in fact, in the next couple of weeks, we'll be sharing with you the title of the book cover, just so that we want to unveil that with you as well, because you're part of our family. And also just really the tremendous endorsements that we've received already, people who have read the book and who have already endorsed it, which to us, we're just a simple priest and a psychologist in the city of Jacksonville, but to see some of the people that have really taken the time to endorse this book is really, for us, humbling, and to have their names associated with us is just something that we could have never imagined. And at the end of the day, we just hope that this book inspires and encourages you. And as we talked about last week, is if you're interested in wanting to go ahead and pre-order this book, or at least get on a list to pre-order this book, you can do so by going to our website at healthymindshhealthysouls.com. Again, it's healthymindshhealthysouls.com. And if you're absolutely, just tuning in through Ancient Faith and you want to know more about us, you can do it on the website, but also our Facebook page, we've kind of changed it from Healthy Minds, Healthy Souls to now the Lows. So if you simply just put into the search engine the Lows, you can become friends with us as well. And so we're just, once again, grateful that you're all here. You can be part of this conversation tonight, and we definitely encourage you to do so. You can do it in a number of ways. You can call in at 1-855-237-2346. That's 1-855-237-2346. If it's during the live broadcast of this show, you can email us a question at ask at ancientfaith.com. And you can always join the chat room. We've already got, wow, Roxanne, already quite a few people that already have entered the chat room. So we're excited that you're all there and just having a conversation amongst each other. Tonight's topic is a continuation of our last show's topic, in which we talked about parenting during the pandemic. And as many of you know, the statistics that are coming out there, and I hate to use the word statistics because quite honestly, there are people, these are souls that we're seeing. But as of just right before we went on the air tonight, over 80,000 people in this country alone have lost their lives. I mean, it's extraordinary how many people have lost their lives to the coronavirus. There's tremendous amount of still uncertainty. There's also worries about us going back to work and going back to some semblance of what many of us would call some level of normalcy, and having questions about that. Are we going to be okay? Is this safe? Are we going to catch this coronavirus? And coupled with that is, for many of us as parents, we're trying to manage how do we parent during this pandemic. And so we gave you what we're calling really 6 goals that we should all do, not only just during this pandemic, but really in life in general, but especially during this pandemic. 6 goals that we encourage you with parenting during the pandemic. And we went over the first 3, and so we're going to give you a little bit of a reminder about those first 3, and then we'll give you the other 3. But once again, we encourage you to ask questions, whether through the chat room, whether by calling 1-855-237-2346 by a question that you may have. And listen, when you call in, you don't have to even state your name. You can simply just call and just be anonymous. But you can also ask questions in general about about parenting tips and any kind of tools that we may be able to provide for you. So take advantage of all that. So Roxanne, we began last week on our last show about the importance of us being intentional. Number 1 would be intentional in our parenting during the pandemic. And maybe you could talk a little bit about that. Just give some highlights for our listeners.
Absolutely. And this was really about setting up and beginning to communicate some expectations for what we want to see happen during the new temporary normal. And we sort of talked about helping children really create and follow some semblance of a schedule. The takeaways that we really were sort of asking that we thought might provoke that kind of a goal was, what 3 things did you want your child to do each day? And what 3 things would you like to do each day? And the key there was really trying to give children some structure to fall back upon, but also the flexibility to sort of do things at their own pace, on their own time, within boundaries that you've already set up from the get-go. And that way it sort of lifts the burden from you having to be the one to create every ounce of direction at every point during their day with all the reminders. But just the responsibility of remembering everything that they needed to do at different points really creates such a burden for parents. So this was really about trying to be intentional and setting things up proactively to where you don't have to shoulder so much of that burden.
And I think, one of the things that you'll find out later on about our book is the importance of truly intentionality. I think in every single relationship, Roxanne, whether it is our relationship with Christ, our relationship with our spouse, our relationship with our children, I think one of the secrets to a healthy relationship, whether in a pandemic or outside, is the importance of being intentional. Truly going out of your way and to make sure that I don't let my feelings lead me, but I have choices that lead my life, and making sure that I'm being intentional in how I show love to my spouse, intentional about listening, intentional about forgiving, intentional about connecting. So I love that. So number 1, friends, is be intentional with your children in parenting during this pandemic.
And number 2 was really knowing their love language, because we are all best at following direction and complying with pressures and doing what we need to do when our own tanks are full. And we really stress the importance of that. I mean, there was a lot of chat room noise last show about pushback from kids. And, you hear about the homework struggles, you hear about the pushback with screen time and tech time and, chores. And really, I can't say that it's all based on relationship, but I will say that a very big variable in children's compliance falls back on the relationship that they have with you and whether they feel loved. Many children are more likely to accept redirections and requests when they have already felt love and they can remember positive experiences with you. When they're in a positive sentiment with you, they're much more likely to give you the benefit of the doubt when you fall, or if you happen to correct them more harshly, or if you're asking them to do things and they can remember having a very positive experience with you in the recent past, they're much more likely to comply. And we really also talked about not forgetting our spouse, right? Right, honey? I mean, it's so important because kids do better when parents do better. And so knowing the love language of your children was number 2, but also not forgetting how to fill the tank of your spouse as well. Knowing that creates that emotional climate of people willing to please.
And, ask yourself, as you're listening to the show tonight, ask yourself, do I know the love language of my child? And furthermore, do I know the love language of my spouse? I know that many of us may say, yeah, well, I know them, but, in our work and in our ministry, I will tell you more often than not, I can't tell you, in fact, how many times we have been in a counseling session or even in talks with children, and the response of when we do a test that kind of reflects what the love languages truly are, there is oftentimes a disconnect between what someone thought the love language was and what it actually was. So really take some time to truly ask them, what speaks to you the most? What is one thing that I do that you love that I do? And it may be, for your children, sometimes it may be, well, I love it, Mom, when you make this great meal or when you make brownies or something. But, try to dig a little bit deeper and say, what are some things that you just love when Mama or Baba goes and does something for you that you just think, tell me a little bit about that, and really kind of get under the surface about what it is that speaks of them. Because in relationships, even with whether it's a spouse, a friend, and most importantly, our children, is that you will oftentimes our children will be, you're building a level of trust and confidence and an investment that you're making in them when they see that you're actually taking the time to understand them. When you're going out of your way to say, you know what, I'm not going to label what I think you are, but actually taking the time to truly identify what it is and then feed you based upon that, and really getting to know that. So we already have a phone call that came in, and so I love, it's Allison from Virginia. Allison, are you there?
Yes, I am.
So thank you so much for joining our show this evening and being on our show on parenting during the pandemic. So please share your question.
Okay, my daughter is 4, and so far she's our only living child. And we also live in an apartment, so we don't have a yard, and all the playgrounds and parks are closed around us. So she's really been suffering with the lack of interaction with her friends. We've tried video calls, but they don't really work at her age because everyone's just fiddling around with the different features on the apps and ignoring each other or fighting. And she's had some regressions with like potty training issues we haven't dealt with for about a year. So I'm wondering if there's any advice on how to help her through this, and when no one's willing to have play dates or anything, and for good reason, and how we can help her just get through this and with good mental health intact.
That's been probably one of the most common things that I've seen surface among so many young families is regression with potty training. I think I've heard that 6 times in the last 2 weeks. And that's, just talking about a handful of young families. And I think with any change period, you start to see these sort of unconscious shifts that take place in kids. And they're often cues for very mindfully aware parents, such as yourself. They get it, it. There's some stress going on, and our body is the first to show the signal that we're uncomfortable or something's wrong. And even as adults, our bodies show us signs. Even many children, maybe a little bit more school-age children, are having trouble sleeping in their room suddenly. And my biggest feedback for parents who are seeing a regression in their children is to take a step back with them and start over again with how how you initially trained it, whatever it was, where it's sleeping in your own bed or using the potty, so backing up, asking her to go sit on the potty every hour rather than sort of getting into battles. I just would sort of say, good, let's set a timer, let's go sit down and try again. And so we would just kind of back up with them without too much conversation about it. Because I think, when we start to talk about it or draw attention to it, sometimes that creates an anxiety in kids around it. So the more we just kind of act and back up with them and walk with them through those steps, a lot of times we can kind of heal the process through that journey without creating a lot of internal angst in children. Because again, the body is often the first cue that a change has happened on the outside that we haven't quite understood. So that would probably be my feedback. I don't know, Nick, do you have anything else to add on that?
Well, I think that the key is just, during this time, remembering, and we'll get to this a little bit later on in the show, but to remind yourself that our children are feeding truly off of our emotions and how we deal with it, and being aware of how we respond in that, and if there's been a disappointment, if there's been a stress or whatever, or basically a regression, that they're going to feed off that no matter how old or young they are. And so I just would be very cautious about that. I think that we're just simply talking about a season. To me, this is a season that we're going through with this pandemic. It's not, I think our brain oftentimes tends to deal with things in absolutes, but we're dealing with this thing as a seasonal thing, just like it's spring or summer. And I'm not trying to minimize it, but I also think it's helpful for your own self-care to kind of approach it that way. And so that's my approach would be much like what Roxanne was saying, but also just be aware of just trying to connect to God and saying, God, give me that patience that I need to. Give me that understanding that, I'm just in a season right now. I know this is going to be difficult, but we're going to get through this, and just kind of almost allowing yourself to take a breath, to not look at, to not put so much pressure on you potentially to try to make sure that your child is quote unquote potty trained, or whatever that issue may be for other listeners, especially during this time, and just simply saying, okay, I'm just going to let this happen the way it needs to happen, and just be patient in the moment.
That's a great feedback too, Nick, right? Because we also don't want to begin stressing about a new permanent problem in our children, because oftentimes these things remit spontaneously on their own as sort of life finds its new normal. I remember, Nick, think back to when we had a fire in our home. It was a devastating time in our life, and we had to move out of our home. And I want to say that our son George was probably around 4 or 5, and he began to show some very interesting signs of anxiety and stress. He sort of developed this kind of tic where he would blink his eyes a lot, and we couldn't quite figure out what was going on. And then his breathing got irregular, and we thought, gee, he's an allergy or something. And it wasn't. It was his little body reacting to, I've lost my home, I've lost my toys, we've moved into another place. This is very weird. Nothing is normal. And interestingly enough, as we found our new normal and our new pace, and we relaxed, we found that all of his issues also remitted. And so it's hard not to stress about the new problems that we see in our children, but recognizing that in the journey we find that new normal, not to stress too much, but just back up a little bit with them, walk them back through those stages, and trust that it will probably disappear as life, kind of takes on its new normal. I hope that helps, Allison.
Oh, it does. Thank you. Do you also have any tips about the social isolation as an only child at this time?
Social isolation as an only child has been, I think social isolation has probably been the number one issue that we're seeing really across the entire age span, from the elderly to the only children, to those who aren't married. And, FaceTimes and things like that are very hard for school-age kids. They're also harder, even on the elderly. So the only thing that I really have found helpful for children like that, I don't know what kind of an area you live in, but being outside, connecting in nature with other living things has a tremendous power, because although you're not connecting with another human soul, there's beauty in life outside of the stagnant stagnant nature of the home. And so learning to connect in other ways outside of ourselves in an outdoor setting is helpful. I mean, we've found parks in Jacksonville that we've lived here. I've lived here 20 years. I never even knew existed. And we've found places that aren't so crowded. And it's amazing how much children and really adults alike can enjoy being out and connecting with life outside of our homes, and sort of, again, recognizing this isn't a permanent, but for the temporary, let's get outside of our homes and connect with life and nature.
And Allison, to kind of go back to the first point that we made as these goals of parenting during the pandemic, I think number one, remember that we talked about be intentional. So I would make it almost to where you create an intentional calendar where you're taking your child, at a set time, as best as you can, or set, either morning or afternoon, where you're with your child and you're doing something outside. I think that those predictable things that we can provide for them also create some stability as well in the home.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, we're more in a city area, but there are parks nearby we can drive to. So
yes.
Thank you.
Excellent. Allison, thank you so much for calling in and for being part of our Healthy Minds, Healthy Souls family. And I encourage the rest of you that are tuning in, whether you're in our chat room, if you're on Facebook Live, or if you are through the website, whatever means it is, feel free, just like Allison did, just call in if you've got a question. You don't always have to share your name. You can be totally anonymous, but ask questions. This is what our show really is all about. We never want to be a show that simply is just a monologue where we're just kind of telling you things and then you just tend to listen. We want to have a dialogue. We want to have a conversation. We truly believe that growth happens among other ways, but among other ways is through our dialogue, our open conversation as family. So you can do that by calling in at 1-855-237-2346. That's 1-855-237-2346. You can also join our chat room, or you can also email us a question live during the show at ask@ancientfaith.com. So we're on number 2, talking about knowing their love languages. So your assignment, friends, is to make sure that you find out the love languages of every member of your family, and just spend time with them. Either asking those questions. There's some great resources out there that are online. Gary Chapman, who wrote the best-selling book, The 5 Love Languages, has a great resource online that you can actually take a test for couples. And I think he actually has one for children as well.
The 5 love languages of children.
Right. And so I would encourage you to those are tests that you can take online, and that way, and your children obviously could take online. So definitely take advantage of that. But know their love languages. It can probably save a tremendous amount of heartache and struggle in the future. So number 3, Roxanne, let's get to number 3.
Number 3 was really making room for everybody's experience in your home, from their different viewpoints, their different realities, their different feelings, their different needs. As our recent caller just mentioned, an only child is going to have very different needs. From kids who are dealing with sibling rivalry, from high school seniors who are missing out on everything. So I think that the goal here is to really notice and make room for what your child is experiencing. Helping them to articulate it is also important. This is a very, very good lesson to learn in life. These are really great teaching moments that, even when we're lonely, even when we have a problem, there isn't always a solution that's fitting. That makes us feel better. And it's a lesson in discomfort, right? And I'm sort of a really big fan of, the earlier our children learn that the adults don't have all the answers, that everything isn't always made comfortable and isn't always easy, is the start of a more radically accepting journey through life, that I'm going to accept what I'm faced with, and sometimes it's uncomfortable. Loneliness is uncomfortable, just like being afraid is uncomfortable. Uncertainty is uncomfortable, but we can tolerate discomfort. It's not pleasant, but we can handle it. We're okay. Eventually things, we climb out of the valley and we reach the mountaintop again. But during those times, it is a lesson in how to tolerate. What makes tolerating this discomfort easier for us? And speaking back to that caller, I even just remembered, being a pen pal is a really great tool for feeling loneliness. Kids have forgotten how to use snail mail, and to be able to articulate and empty out your words and your life and your feelings on a card and to draw pictures really is a beautiful way to teach kids, the importance of connection, even if it can't be physical. And so making all of that, making room for that is important, and trying to accommodate those needs where it's possible was our number 3. So investigate, where are your kids getting frustrated? Where do they push back? And how can we accommodate them where possible?
Yeah, and I think it's just to kind of build on what you were saying, Roxanne, it's so important, as Roxanne was sharing, that not everyone will deal with a crisis the exact same way. And we've talked about this in the past, that some people deal with it just by simply internalizing it. Some people deal with it by expressing it outwardly. It's just almost like in many ways, and I hate to use, this is maybe not the best example, but it's almost like mourning. The way people mourn differs from people to people. And so I think sometimes we think that one size fits all, that everyone would be exactly the same way. But just like we are all different, our children are different, we have to just kind of make room that people are going to process this differently. But the key is that as a parent, you're also aware that, we are also responsible in some ways of their emotional health of our children. So we have to kind of take liberty to kind of understand and kind of get to know them, again, going back to that love languages, but really get to know them in a way that we can identify what they're thinking about. I'll use our kids as an example. George and Gabrielle are totally two different people. They're extraordinary children in their own right, but Gabriella is much more the free spirit and, kind of goes into her room and will read for hours at a time. And, this pandemic, to be quite honest with you, I don't think it's even fazed her a bit. George, on the other hand, we have to be cautious about in how we communicate that in his presence, because sometimes he can get to the point where he will carry our emotions. He will carry what we're feeling. And so as we've always shared time and time again, is the importance of remembering that our children will live in our subconscious. They will live in how we are expressing outwardly our emotions. So they actually feel it. There's actually there's studies on this, that people, that our children actually feed off of the nonverbal cues that we're giving. So it's paramount as parents that you can say, you could be teaching a whole other lesson that you may be unaware of, simply in the actions that you're taking. So just be cautious about that. And that's all we're talking about. Number 3 is make room. So we have we're getting questions all over through the chat room and on our Facebook Live. And we have a very good friend, John from Australia. Wow, that's kind of extraordinary that our reach is that far.
Welcome from Australia.
From down under, yes. John from Australia is asking a great question. And it's a question that I think many have been asking. And I will... the question is how do we keep our faith strong during the pandemic? And I will tell you, John, and to all of you that, we've been doing sermons every Sunday since this pandemic on topics like that, on how do we find Christ in the crises. And we actually had a great, if you go to the Healthy Minds, Healthy Souls Facebook page, there's a great a podcast that we did last week or a couple of weeks ago, I think, with the National Philopticus of the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese here in America, in which they wanted some encouraging words that we put together. So that'd be an area that I would tell you to start with. Obviously, on the surface, I would remind you as well as those that are struggling during this time, is that there is and oftentimes a knee-jerk reaction when we are going through something that is out of our control to try to control it, to try to maneuver and to manage it. And we see that day to day. I mean, one of the ways that you can tell if you're trying to do that is how much time you spend on a topic. If you spend more than 10 minutes on a topic and have not been able to change that topic, then more often than not, you're trying to control something that really belongs in the out of my control bucket, or it's in God's control bucket. So in this pandemic, because there's obviously so much that is out of our control, one of the things that we encourage everyone to do from the very beginning is to hand this over to God. We hand it over to God through our prayers, through reading the scripture. We say prayer removes in many ways worry. The Bible says, do not be anxious or worried about anything, but in prayer. That's found in the book of Philippians chapter 4. So we talk about reading the Bible, that your word, O Lord, is a lamp to my feet, a light to my path. In other words, the Bible quotes about the importance of reading the Bible by telling us that we need to be reading about Christ. And then when we read verse that says, come all of you who are heavy laden, who are heavy burdened, and I will give you rest. That I think more than any other lesson that we get with regards to this pandemic is the importance and the total dependence that we have, not on ourselves, but on God, and leaning into Him to say, God, I'm leaning into you. I can't control this. This is out of my control, but I'm going to simply spend time learning and growing in you and depending everything on you, because the devil and the enemy, we know from the scriptures, is there to steal, kill, and destroy our soul, period. And so he would love nothing more that this pandemic would steal the Paschal, this Easter season that we're in. He would love for it to steal the joy. He would love to steal, to be quite honest with you, the triumphant spirit that we have in Christ right now. So I would just encourage you, remembering that God is in control, and the importance of prayer, reading scripture, as well as ultimately looking for ways that you can channel that energy that you're spending in worry, because oftentimes worry is an emotional drain. It drains you. You're not productive oftentimes when you worry. It kind of just sucks the life out of you. But taking that energy actually to make a difference in this world. But please listen to those podcasts. And we have a podcast here at Ancient Faith called Healthy Souls. It has all of our sermons, and a lot of them are, like I said, are on this issue. So I encourage you to do so. But thank you so much, John, and give our love to everyone, in Australia. And we're so grateful that you're part of the Healthy Minds, Healthy Souls family.
I mean, I know that during this pandemic, we've started a new routine where every morning, and we're blessed to sort of be home still at this time, but we go out and we open the Bible and we read together. And it's amazing, but no matter where you're reading, you can't read more than a page, sometimes even a chapter, or sometimes even a verse, without getting something that you needed to hear for a struggle you've had that week. Mm-hmm. And it always amazes me how it seems to speak life into exactly what I was needing to hear at the time I was needing to hear it. And so again, even if it's a scripture that I've read before, that I'm familiar with, I might read it and hear it in a different way, or it connects to my soul in a more powerful way. So even in those moments, cultivating a habit of just getting up, read a chapter, read a verse, read a page. And I think it'll help keep us walking alongside the journey God has called us to live, because during the pandemic, we are most threatened by starting to unravel and live lives that don't really resemble who God has called us to be, and the devil loves nothing more.
Right. And so we would encourage you all to have a verse for the day, a verse that you would just kind of lean into throughout the day. We call them in our home refrigerator verses. These are just verses that you would just simply remind yourself with. So let me ask you, do you have a Bible verse that you lean into when you're going through a difficult time, when you're going through a crisis? If you don't, let me just encourage you, have about 10 different Bible verses that you can totally lean on. So we encourage you to do that. So we, once again, just want to remind everyone that you're listening to Healthy Minds, Healthy Souls. We are in part 2 of a show that we began at our last show called Parenting During the Pandemic. So many people have been asking just what are some goals, what are some tools that we can provide as a priest and as a psychologist on how to parent during the pandemic. And so in this last half hour, we basically are going to share with you 6 goals. We shared the first 3 in the first 30 minutes. The next 3 are going to be in the second half. But we do want to encourage you, if you want to join the conversation, you can do it a number of ways. You can email us during the show at ask@ancientfaith.com. You can call in, as others have already today, by calling in at 1-855-237-2346. You could also join our amazing chat room team, and there's so many of you that are in there. We love seeing all of you there. Great comments. I love what you were saying, Rafi, and looking at some of the other Nicola. Just some really, great. Dave. Anyway, continue those comments. We'd love to have, and we are reading them as we are going through the show. So, Roxanne, number 4, a very, very important one. So let's talk about that one.
So number 4, we're just going to jump right in. have realistic expectations. I think that, so many of us, especially those who are listening to a Parenting During the Pandemic podcast, are here because we really are striving to be good parents. We're really trying. We want to be doing a good job. We care about it. We think about it. We worry about it. We have expectations for making everything kind of work out in the best way possible. And I not that I want to lower our bar, but, just the very fact that you're on this podcast listening to it, asking these questions in the chat room, you already get the award for being an amazing parent because you care enough to be here. And, I think that we put a lot of pressure on ourselves as parents. I included, I'm speaking to myself. I know you, Nick, the same way. But I think at times we have to really have realistic expectations for what we are going through. We are about to embark. Not only have we been quarantined all this time, we're about to embark on summer, which deletes 8 hours of school that our kids have had, which I'm starting to think already about how am I going to replace those 8 hours because they are major chunks in our day that we need in order to work because we're working all day long.
And some parents have been dealing with that already because not all schools are going with that yet.
We are blessed that our kids, actually are forced to be in school for the 8 hours. And there are many who just have to sign in at one point during the day. But so I feel summer is going to sort of either be the same or exacerbate for many parents. But I think we have to have these realistic expectations so that we're not so disappointed. We're expecting kids to fall into place with what's going on, and we forget that they too are learning to adjust. They too are learning to acclimate to this changed circumstance. And even things like collaborative play with siblings need to be learned again. It's an expectation that, you have free time. You should be able to just, all the kids go play together. Or my only child, we'll just go out and get one of those games out that you normally play and sit there and do Legos. Well, these things have to be learned again because we forget that in our very overscheduled world that existed prior to the pandemic, our kids were not free time playing together. They didn't have endless amounts of hours to sit down and be creative. So now we're asking them to be creative. We're asking them to sit and do these things or play with a puzzle or play with your sibling without fighting. They haven't had to do that because maybe siblings have both been involved in highly structured activities outside the home and they really haven't played a board game together for 3 years. And so, we have kids who are fighting a lot more than previously speaking. They don't have a break from each other. They're forgetting that the goal of play in that moment is not necessarily to win or who does what first or how you did it or what color I get, but the goal is to just pass time together so we're not both bored. And when we remember that goal, it becomes a little easier to tolerate those moments and not get caught up on all these side paths of fighting. So kids have to learn how to have conflict, right? We have to be able to step in and teach them how to listen. And did you just hear, what is your sister trying to share with you? Do you think you understand? They have to learn how to apologize. Do you have any regrets about what you just said to your brother? And so I think that we have to have realistic expectations here about what we are expecting of our children. Whether it's board games or go out and ride bikes together, there will be fighting. And these are all moments where it's an opportunity to sort of learn and grow with them. And I think we have to give grace to ourselves as parents too, right? I once heard it said, and I love this quote. I heard someone say, the parent you are today does not have to be the parent you are tomorrow. That we have to acknowledge and accept the day for whatever it was, but every night is a new opportunity to reset, to move forward, and to decide what needs to be different tomorrow. What did I learn about myself? What did my kids struggle with today? And that's when we get to be problem solvers. And rather than label makers or blame assigners, we become problem solvers for what did they need to navigate that moment more effectively, right? Because as you said beautifully earlier, our voice becomes their voice. We don't want children internalizing the message, I'm difficult, I'm lazy, I'm selfish, right? And so we have to be careful how we're speaking to them and that we're being a problem solver more than a label maker. And Nick, maybe you could expound on labels.
Right. I think, and I love what you're saying, Roxanne, because I think one of the things that I think one of the struggles that we have as people is that we not only want to label things, so often we can label our children or label our spouse, but we oftentimes will also label ourselves. And those labels that we put on ourselves come from a narrative that we have created. Oftentimes those labels, I know for me in my own life, I can remember people saying negative things over me. You know, I was very skinny. I was very short growing up. I remember people kept saying, "You're a shorty. You're skinny. You'll never." And I always had a dream of I wanted to be like Mike. You know, that there's an ESPN.
Michael Jordan.
Yeah, I mean, there's the Last Dance that many of you may be aware of that's airing on ESPN, and it's like the life of the last season of Michael Jordan and the Chicago Bulls. And the point being is that I wanted to be just like Mike. I could totally remember those back in those days. And you know, I think there's labels that we take, these negative things that people have placed over us, that you're not a good parent or that you're lacking in some way. And then there's also labels that we create on the inside of us. Sometimes when we're looking at social media or we're looking at other people, other moms who are parenting and doing this great project, or other dads who are doing this project, and why am I not doing that? Or they're such a better parent than we are. And we can create these unhealthy narratives that really create unrealistic expectations in ourselves. And so sure, yes, let's learn and we can get ideas, but we can't let those unhealthy labels kind of label who we are, because we don't derive our labels from people. We derive our label from God. That God made us, and the Bible says that we are fearfully and wonderfully made. Each of us have our own unique gifts, our own unique talents. So just be careful, friends, that we don't allow ourselves to carry those labels, not only the ones that we can pass down onto our children, which are, as we've been talking about, these unrealistic expectations on them, but also unhealthy labels that other people have said over us, as well as those that we can create in our own mind, because it's an important principle to remember, is that your life will oftentimes follow the labels that have been spoken over you. Let me say it again. Your life will oftentimes will follow the labels that are over you. And this is a refrigerator verse, so I'm just going to give it to you. You could just, but take some time and read Isaiah 64, verses 8. And this is what Isaiah the prophet says this. He says, "You are the potter," referring to God, "you are the potter, and we are the clay, and all of us are the work of your hand." Don't you just love that? All of us are the work of your hand. And I just think that's amazing that God is the potter. We're just simply the clay. It's not our job to be the potter in someone else's life. It's also the job to let someone else be the potter in our life. God is the potter, and we're just simply the clay. Let him mold us.
That is one of my favorite verses. I'm so happy you brought that up about the potter's wheel. We dealt with that even this week, and you've heard us speak about our children before, and our daughter, and Gabriella, is probably one of the most curious, outside the box, sort of free spirits that you just can't put in a box. And so, she decided that she was going to be inventing her own skincare line. And she's made facial scrubs for all the family and all of us, and body scrubs and lip balms. I don't know, all sorts of things she's taught herself from YouTube. Well, anyway, I happened to come back into the kitchen to be making dinner, to which I landed upon all of my sugars gone. There's lemon everywhere. There's sugar all over the ground. And it looked like a tornado had come through the kitchen. And, I'm just not that way, right? I tend to clean up right after I go, like things pretty tidy. And when I walk into the kitchen, I'm ready to cook a dinner. And so it is so easy to step into that role of, this is such a mess, right? And I have to remember that I am not supposed to put her on that potter's wheel of, tidy, organized, do it my way. This is too far out of the box. I have to remember that God gave her those gifts because he has a plan for her. And I it's my job to sort of help. Yes, can I put some boundaries there? Yeah, here's a good time to use the kitchen, anytime before 4. I can put some boundaries around there, but it's not my job to mold her into me. It's my job to make allowances for who God has designed her to be. And so I think being careful with those labels of, it's so easy to send that to our kids: irresponsible, messy, lazy. Let's set them up for success. What time can you use the kitchen? If you keep missing the times you're supposed to do things, set a timer. Put an Alexa in their room. Give them a watch to wear. That's something kids don't wear these days. But ask yourself, how can I help them succeed in whatever problem they're facing, in whatever problem we're running into with them? So we're being a problem solver here with having realistic expectations, not a label maker. And that would probably be the biggest piece for number 4. So I don't know, Nick, do you have anything else you want to say on that before we move to number 5?
I think, in light of the time, I think, Roxanne, let's just keep moving forward. But I think it's so important that we just remember that just having those realistic expectations. I have found that most problems in any relationship happen because because of unrealistic expectations, and those unrealistic expectations can be with our spouse. It could be with our friends. I mean, just think about it in your own life. Whenever you have found yourself in an argument with someone that you love, oftentimes it was about something that they did not do that you thought they were going to do. So just be aware, especially during this pandemic, of those unrealistic expectations. And it kind of is a great segue into our number 5 about knowing yourself. Very, very important about truly knowing yourself, because everything that we do, we oftentimes think that we are in total awareness of ourselves. Like as you're talking to me or as I'm talking to you, you're hearing my voice, you believe that everything is kind of happening the way you're perceiving it. But what you don't realize is that there's things that have been accumulating in your life that you're unaware of. That's why I love how we say, and when we're doing confession, we say for the sins that are voluntary and involuntary, the things that I knew about, the things I don't know about. And so when we talk about knowing yourself, it's realizing that, the stress of this pandemic, it's extraordinary, friends, that stress can impact our bodies sometimes weeks and in fact months after something catastrophic. And we will be physically feeling this for a while, but trust me when I tell you this, emotionally, we're going to be impacted by this. And so oftentimes the worries that you have, the stress that you're under, many of you have lost your jobs or are worried about your jobs. You have financial crises that are going on. You have relationship issues. Many of you are spending more time with your spouse than you typically would have. And you're dealing with maybe there's more arguments that you typically would not have had because everyone would be doing their in their own specific, jobs and responsibilities. But there's also the stress of just trying to maintain everything. All the while, every day you're looking out and you're seeing how more and more people are dying from this. And so when we talk about know yourself, and Roxanne, I really want you to talk about this because I think this is I think your notes on this are amazing, but it's just truly being aware of you, not just the you that is projecting to other people, but also studying yourself and knowing kind of, wait a minute, have I taken inventory of just really what's kind of going on in my emotional health right now?
Absolutely. I mean, knowing ourselves, we aren't perfect, right? We're the first to admit, as a priest and a psychologist, we have struggles that every day we are resetting, renewing, realizing, and setting new goals around that. I think we have to know what we're going through, as you said. I mean, if I get up after 9 hours of telemedicine patient sessions, I'm not in a real cheerful, go-getter, let's play Legos kind of mood. I need some space to just decompress. I have to go on a walk. I need to eat something. The other day, my daughter recognized right away. She said, "Do you need a smoothie?" I said, "You know what? That would be great." It was probably written all over my face. I needed to eat, and she made me one. And why did she do that? That wasn't spontaneous. It was because we had a conversation, I think a week earlier, where I said, "Hey, notice me. If you're making food for you, please check with anyone, see if anyone else needs food." We have to communicate what we need. We have to know ourselves and enough to know what we need, right? So we have to pay attention to our own cues. Part of managing stress is making space to notice ourselves and then going one step further and communicating to other people what helps us renew. And remember, these are parenting moments because children are learning how to cope with their feelings and their stress by watching your cues. So
that's so important, Roxanne. If we can, I just want to take a little bit of a break and just highlight that because I think it's so important. Friends, as you're listening, oftentimes you will deal with stress the way you were taught to deal with it, either through what you saw with your parents or some of the people that were in your life. So I love how people sometimes that, when I get people that are in my office and they're screamers and they're yellers and they're yelling at their spouse, you were this and you were that. And, and they'll say to me, when I say to them that, that language is not appropriate or that volume is not helpful, they'll say, well, that's just who I am. And a lot of times it's because it's what they were around. So I think what you're saying, Roxanne, is so important because this is a powerful sermon, a visual sermon that you are teaching your children, is how you are dealing with this pandemic, is showing them how they are teaching them either healthy or unhealthy coping mechanisms when they are dealing with something that is unpredictable in their own life. And I think that just cannot be overstated how important that is.
Yeah, acknowledge our own shortcomings and weaknesses. It's hard, but we all have, I think, different vulnerabilities. And I think it's a good question to ask yourself. The takeaway under Know Yourself is, what is my greatest struggle during this pandemic? What is the greatest thing that I seem to struggle with during this pandemic? And each week, the answer to that might be different. But whatever it is, I want you to just notice it, because noticing is the first step to changing it or setting some small goals, seeking small wins around that one thing. Maybe I need to be better about, planning ahead and, bringing smoothies into my office for the day so I don't go too long without eating. These are small things, but even communicating to my kids my own body awareness, I want them to know that I'm checking in with my own self. My shoulders are tense. My breathing feels short. I need a walk. I need to go sit up outside for a few minutes. I just need to tune into some music or a podcast. I need some alone time, or I really need to connect. Can you go on a walk with me? I'll even ask my child. I'm known in the house to be asking the question, when I look at my kids the way they're sitting, especially George, I'll say, are you comfortable? And every time it's the same response, because he looks uncomfortable. That's why I'm asking. And he'll say, I'm fine. And then 2 seconds later, because he noticed it, he'll say, now I'm not fine. I'm not comfortable. And he'll try to situate to get himself comfortable. But what is that teaching? It's body awareness. What is your body telling you? And I think too often we are so disconnected from ourselves. We don't know ourselves. We don't know what we need. We don't know what our struggles are. So we end up sort of pointing outside of ourselves for everything that's wrong, when truly we need to be seeking, looking within to correct what we can. And that makes dealing with the outside stressors just a bit easier.
I think, too, Roxanne, and I just want to take a little bit of a moment. I think what would be helpful is also acknowledging that when we do make mistakes, because I will tell you that I remember, I think it was last week or 2 weeks ago, I'd gotten upset. And I can't, it's funny, I can't even remember what the topic was on, but I remember feeling so bad afterwards about the way in which I had dealt with, I think it was with George. And maybe you, as you're tuning in and you're listening, you can totally relate to that. But like you're responding, you get all out of, you get a little bent out of shape, and you respond. And then afterwards, you're like, oh my gosh, that really wasn't the way that I would have wanted to handle that situation. That's not the way that, that I believe that God has led me to lead our kids that way. So I think it's so important maybe to talk about that, during this pandemic, we're going to make mistakes. And I think sometimes we kind of avoid, dealing with a conflict by simply just, or a problem that may have happened by not wanting to own it or not apologizing of it. And sometimes even our children never hear us as parents say we're sorry. Maybe you could speak a little bit about parenting by also acknowledging to your children when you do make a mistake that you're sorry.
2 words, I'm sorry. They're the hardest 2 words to say, aren't they? And it's such a mystery to children, too, because they almost can't believe it, that parents aren't perfect. But I like to think behind sorry is regret. There's something that I regret, and I can say sorry when I can recognize what piece of this I regret. And so that's often what I would encourage you to lead with is, I regret saying or doing or handling in such a way my preference would have been, and then teaching your kids what you would have hoped to say or do. But those 2 words are so important, and you got to think that you're cultivating a lesson that they're going to learn in their own families moving forward. They might be able to say sorry to their spouse, sorry to their own children. And, know your triggers. So preventing you from having to say sorry even is knowing what's going to get me upset. What are the biggest triggers, and do I have a plan for how I'm going to handle those? In our house, we love the reset, redo moment, where when someone does something wrong, there's an opportunity. Let's try that again. I don't think that's the way you meant to handle it. Let's try that again. And usually that is enough to get kids to sort of turn it around in that moment. And because no one's perfect. I need the reset sometimes. Let me try that again. I don't think I said that the way I wanted to share that. So we could use it even on ourselves, but knowing ourselves and being able to apologize would be number 5.
It's like David says in the book of Psalms, another great, beautiful verse that you should remember, and we hear it at every single service that we do in the Orthodox Church. It says, a contrite and a humble heart, O God, you will never despise. In other words, what makes God happy is when we actually can own and have a contrite heart, a humble heart, where we own that, hey, look, I did this wrong. This wasn't the way I needed to be. This is not what you would have wanted me to do. So I encourage you to have that contrite and humble heart when we're parenting our children. Never be too proud to simply acknowledge that the mistakes that you have, because again, you're teaching your children how they themselves are going to parent later on.
Number 6, and sort of our final point here, and there's just so much more we want to say about
Right.
Parenting is such a huge topic. But this is really leading with our values and our faith. As you just said so beautifully earlier, Nick, catching ourselves when we aren't leading. If we forget to lead with value, which we all do, it's a normal part of humanity, and the flesh and the spirit are kind of always at war. If you don't think so, our feedback is usually that you don't, you're losing the battle. So it's a beautiful thing when you realize that you haven't witnessed in the way that we are called to. And so, Nick, maybe you could spend a little bit of time here on sort of the gratitude and respect and love.
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the things I always ask, parents is if you were to ask your children, what are the values of the family? Like, what are the values of the Lowe family, or whatever you can fill in your own last name, but what would be those values? Would your children be able to identify them? And this is a great exercise I would encourage all of you to do, even during this pandemic, is simply to allow yourselves to have a conversation with your children about what are the values that we want to uphold in our home. And we've kind of shared some of our own with you tonight, that we kind of always lean on, we kind of go back on, but you can create your own list, or you can use this list and add to it. But for us in our home, a big value is, obviously, is grace and forgiveness. The importance of really allowing people, as we've been talking about already, but the opportunity for people to be themselves within reason. In other words, allowing themselves to kind of allow God to be the one that's showing grace, that and obviously ourselves, that if He's forgiving, we need to be forgiving. And so we need to be teaching that not only in our verbal response to our children when we see our children having an argument or a disagreement, teaching them that, but also emulating that in our actions. And so one of the values would be grace and the need to forgive. I don't think a great thing that another value that we have is always be grateful. We say this all the time on our show, but we say it more in our home, is that we should never let our complaining outweigh our praising. So we should never spend more time complaining about our children or them complaining about each other, or for that matter, about anything else, without spending more time in praising. This pandemic is awful. I mean, there is so much darkness around it that we don't even need the news to affirm it, because we can simply see it. I know priest friends of mine that have had 5 and 10 funerals already, just with the coronavirus, and already exhibiting some major emotional struggles because of it. And so I think that it's dark all around, but there is also an opportunity for us to say, okay, what, Lord, can I take from this and apply something positive in it? That I'm not going to allow the darkness to win, that even in the midst of the darkness, I'm going to find some light. And one of those is being grateful. Like, I think the opportunity, I don't know when the last time I saw children riding bikes in our neighborhood. Oftentimes kids are being trucked and bused from one event to the next event in our lives, and we don't spend time as where in the past we'd see kids in the neighborhood and moving around. So I encourage that importance of just saying, let me be grateful. Let me just be thankful to God that I have air to breathe. I have eyes to see. I'm listening to this podcast. I mean, whatever it is, but let that in. And then obviously we talk about respect, and really understanding the importance of just, respecting, but not only just a respect towards our children, but also a mutual respect of them towards us as well. And Roxana, you want to
Well, I think respect, when we validate our children, we validate our spouse, whatever feeling is being brought to us, whether it's an only child who's feeling lonely, and we can sit there and validate that. Remember, we don't have the pressure to have to solve a problem just because we validate it. We show and teach the value of respecting another human being when we validate their experience, and we make room for it. We help them articulate it. We listen to it, and we get it, and we are connecting emotionally to them in that experience. That is respect, rather than shutting them down, making it not a big deal. We want children, we always say, our big feedback for George is take up space. We want to hear you. We want to see you. We want your feelings and thoughts present. So, respect can be found even in just validating without having to solve every problem.
And just the last point on that, on making sure that we're having those godly values is go all in with God. Like, I just want to encourage all of you that just to spend time with God in prayer, reading your Bibles. These are great that you're listening to this podcast, but continue to go all in with God. I tell people that if there's ever a time where we need to shift from the being in the shallow end of the pool to getting into the deep end of the pool to going all in, it's now. This is the time. So I just want to encourage you with that. Please, if you have enjoyed this radio show, we encourage you, share with your friends and your family these 6 goals of parenting during the pandemic. We also encourage you to be part of our next show. 2 weeks from today, May 26th, we will have our next show at 8 p.m. right here at ancientfaith.com. Thanks again for joining us, and God bless you, and stay strong in your walk of faith.
This is Ancient Faith Today with Father Tom Soroka, a weekly live call-in show addressing the issues of our day from a distinctly Orthodox perspective. You can join the conversation by calling in at 855-237-2346. That's 855-AF-RADIO. Father Tom is the priest at St. Nicholas Orthodox Church in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and welcomes guests from across the globe to discuss important topics of interest. Here's Father Tom.
Christ is risen. Welcome to the special edition of Ancient Faith Today. This is Father Tom Soroka, and I'm so glad that you're with us this evening. We'll be taking your calls in a bit at 1-855-AF-RADIO. That's 1-855-237-2346. Bobby will be answering your calls tonight, so please make sure to turn the show volume off before you come on air. You can also join us in the chat room, which is now open by going to ancientfaith.com/live. Another way to connect with us is to go to facebook.com/ancientfaithtoday and place your question in the thread for tonight's show. And finally, you can also send us an email at aft@ancientfaith.com. So let's get started. Tonight, we're remembering the work and legacy of Father Paul Laser, who departed this life on Saturday, May 9th, 2020, succumbing to Parkinson's disease that he suffered from for many years after his retirement in 2007 from active ministry. Father Paul was well known during much of his time at St. Vladimir Seminary as the Dean of Students and as a teacher of practical theology, that is, how to serve the church services, and Church Slavonic. He was a native of Canonsburg, Pennsylvania. born in 1939, and was raised in the church by his pious parents, Joseph and Anna, who were themselves exemplary servants of Christ and the church. Even though he was educated at the University of Pittsburgh for a promising career in chemical engineering, in 1961, he left that and enrolled in St. Vladimir Seminary, being educated along with his friends, the late Father Thomas Hopko and David Drillock, whom we'll be hearing from tonight. It was during this time that he met his beloved wife, Natalia, known as Natasha, herself a devout Orthodox Christian. After his ordination, he served parishes in Wisconsin and Connecticut. He and his wife began their family, and then they returned to the seminary in 1977, this time as a member of the faculty. He served there faithfully for 30 years, guiding, influencing, and forming generations of priests with his confident presence, his love of serving the divine services with dignity and order, and his affirming pastoral counsel as a confessor and pastor. There are so many good things to say about Father Paul, so tonight we'll be joined by 5 people whose lives he's influenced to give us a picture of the enduring legacy of Father Paul Laser. And so first up, tonight, we're going to welcome Father Alexander Rentel, the Chancellor of the Orthodox Church in America, who after he was a student under Father Paul's tutelage, eventually became a teacher of some of the same subjects at St. Vladimir Seminary. Father Alexander, welcome to Ancient Faith Today. Christ is risen.
Indeed he is risen. How are you, Father?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for joining us. I know you have an extremely busy schedule, but of course it's important that we take the time to honor Father Paul's memory. And I know that you have a special connection to his ministry at St. Vladimir's. So let's start with just the simple question. Tell our listeners a little bit about your relationship with Father Paul. How did you first encounter him?
Oh, wow. You know, my first encounter with him was when I came for an interview at St. Vladimir Seminary, and it was the 5th week of Lent, 1992. I don't remember the exact date, but I remember the liturgical time. And I was here for pre-sanctified liturgy, and I sat in on classes, and the most fun I had was sitting in his liturgics class. And prior to the class, he interviewed me, and we spoke at length in very great technical detail in a way that only a few people in my life have been able to have that kind of conversation with, about the book that he translated, Evening Worship, which was a collection of articles by the great Russian liturgical scholar Nikolai Uspensky. And he was so shocked that I had read the book cover to cover. And then I told him, but Father Paul, I haven't read it cover to cover. I've read it twice cover to cover. We talked, and his enthusiasm for liturgy, resonated with me. I had a great enthusiasm for liturgy myself, my whole life. And, we got along very well with a shared love of the services like that.
That's wonderful. So, of course, eventually you ended up teaching at St. Vladimir Seminary. So tell us a little bit about both your memories of Father Paul, what you learned from him, anything really you wish to share to help us all understand what was so special about him.
Father Thomas, just like you said in your introduction, he loved the services. And he loved, I think you said, the dignity and the good order of the services. But he was not, pedantic about that. He loved that because he believed in the power of the services. And to know Father Paul, to hear him talk about the services, he insisted on good order, being attentive to detail, having that attention, down to the smallest points. And I remember the notes that he would draw that are still used by many of our clergy. And he had diagrams and lists and orders, and he would use them himself. But, it was not an end in of itself for him. He believed in the power of the services, to save, to reveal the mystery of Christ. And part of that was I don't mean to say it that it sounds simple or trite, but a well done service, that a very well done, piously executed, carried out service had great power among people to come to faith and have their faith renewed, their knowledge of God increased, and in that way. And he was always, when he served, he loved to teach, and he would often say, Father Meyendorf, he loved to teach when he served. But I often found that maybe he was talking about himself like that, because he would always share a rubric detail. Father Alexander Schmemann would do it this way. Father Meyendorf would do it this way. When I was growing up, they did it this way. But to give a small example that kind of bridged the world for him, as you know, when you have concelebrating priests at the time of the chanting of the creed in the Russian tradition, or any of the traditions for that matter, all of the priests hold the air together and wave it over the holy gifts. And to bring the worlds together for Father Paul, he loved that moment. And you could see he just loved it, because for him, it emphasized, the concelebration, all of the priests doing this work, this sacred work together. But he would take it one step further and say, it's like teamwork. Going back to, he was a great basketball player too. As much of his love for services, he would say, it shows the teamwork, brothers working together. And he loved that, but that's what I mean. That's the way it was to, be around him. And he would teach you about this, that, and the other thing, but he would also give that insightful remark.
What I love about that generation of priests is that they served the services very naturally, even though you said, he knew the technical details and he knew every nuance of the services and how things were done in very obscure circumstances. There was something very natural about the way that generation of priests, and I think really it's exemplified so beautifully by Father Paul, in the way in which they felt so at home in the church and conducted the services with such a natural beauty and a natural dignity. Don't you think that's true?
Oh, absolutely. Like a musician, and he was musically gifted, with a voice and ability. He could read music, sing, and all of these sorts of things. And so that's a good analogy for him. Like a musician, he took the time and he knew the scales, he knew the pieces, he knew the repertoire. And when he served, akin to a musician performing, when he served, he just breathed life into the piece, into the liturgy, and moved from just kind of the structures to prayer. He just served the services. And you're right, it was a beautiful thing.
Yeah, I was looking at all of the pictures of Father Paul that were collected at various times, especially during his retirement in 2007 to honor his 30 years at the seminary. And it's very interesting to watch how he comported himself just in those still pictures. And, as a priest, it's easy sometimes to be caught off guard, or you're looking at something. And I can remember my time at seminary when, you would get distracted or something, but he was always focused so intently. And even if, something humorous happened, he always brought everything back to that focus. And again, it's a little hard to describe, but it wasn't a kind of a stiffness, even though he was very tall, he was very imposing, he was always basically the tallest one in church at any given moment. But there was a presence about him, especially when he served, or when he was at the front of the church when he wasn't serving, or he's observing new priests that were serving. He just had a tremendous comportment and a tremendous presence about him.
I agree 100% with what you say, and I can, illustrate that with an anecdote. When we would serve the Paschal midnight services here, at St. Vladimir's, a wonderful celebration, as within, any of our churches. But Father, you get past that midnight hour and you're trying to remember the peculiars of the Paschal liturgy. You're late, you're tired after Holy Week and all of these sorts of things. And perhaps your mind even drifts forward to, the celebration after the great celebration of the liturgy. Father Paul did not lose focus. And I remember vividly the last Paschal liturgy he served here. He was like a rock, and he kept us all focused.
Amazing.
And you knew, as a concelebrant, as a junior concelebrant, you knew that it was going to be okay, basically, because he was so attentive to those things. And he would often teach, that exactly that, being attentive to the details, paying attention, going over them before the service so that you knew what to expect. And he often quoted, and I recalled this line many times, you can't account for everything that will happen. But I would say, that attentiveness to detail that he had, he was so good at, that you're remarking on, and the kind of anchor he provided at the services, that was visibly made clear to me the year after he was there. And I had, as you alluded to, the task of succeeding him in some way and assisting the rector at the chapel, sure. Keeping the services together. You have to do it. But there's no Father Paul there, to say what comes next, or, this,
right.
To just be mindful. And it was, I have to say, that year after, I appreciated him so much more.
Right.
Because,
right.
It's a great task.
Absolutely. And of course, there is another aspect to his life. We just have a few minutes, but want you to touch on this also. He was the confessor to hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of students, both men and women, who were at the seminary. He gave tremendous pastoral advice, which was born out of his ministry as a priest. Sometimes in academic circles, you can have professors and teachers who maybe were never in parish life, and they might not understand the nuances, but he had that 10 years of experience. Tell us a little bit, if you can, about the pastoral side of Father Paul.
Oh, Father Thomas, you're so right. And, I would go one step further. Father Paul loved to reference Canonsburg, his parents in that community. So I would say it was not only born out of the experience of being a priest. We would hear these stories about New Britain, or when he was a priest in Wisconsin, about people always showing up. He often remarked in Wisconsin.
Father Alexander, are you there? Bobby, did we lose Father Alexander?
It appears we did.
Okay, all right. Father Alexander, I'm sorry, we lost your connection there, but let's...
Okay, all right.
Okay, I wasn't sure if we heard him or not.
Sorry, we lost your connection there.
Are you there?
This is David now, but David, you need to turn down your radio.
We lost your connection there.
Go ahead and turn his microphone down.
Okay.
For a second. All right. So let's do this. Let's remind everybody, 1-855-AF-RADIO. If you'd like to call in and share a memory of Father Paul Laser, we'd love to hear from you. At this time, we're going to go to we asked people to give their audio remembrances of Father Paul, and we're so fortunate this evening to have a very poignant memory from his son, Alexander, who is, of course, affectionately known as Sasha. Sasha sent this in, and I know that it comes deeply from his heart. So if we could play this, Bobby, let's listen to Sasha's reflection, please.
Hi, Father Tom. This is Sasha Laser, Father Paul Laser's son, calling in. I feel that calling in live tonight might be a little too challenging, so I wanted to leave you this message. I have 3 memories of my dad I'd like to share. They won't be 2 no's and 1 yes level by any means, but they are personal to me. First, my father made me breakfast every morning before high school, 4 years, and those of you who may have attended the seminary will recall that there was matins at 7:30 every morning. So it meant that he had to be back every morning by 7:30. So my end of the bargain was having to be ready. And he made me breakfast every morning, which usually was pancakes. And to this day, I love making pancakes for my kids. Second memory is listening to music with him, not listening to him sing Elvis, but listening to Elvis, listening to Tchaikovsky. I'm a huge Eric Clapton fan right now, and listening to the beauty in those guitar chords or the piano of Billy Joel was fostered by those memories of listening to music together. The third memory, maybe not surprising to many of you, would be shooting hoops with my dad. He would always shoot hoops with me. Very busy schedule, as many of you know. Even if he was back from church at midnight, he would still shoot around with me. I love shooting around with my kids. Thanks for listening.
Thank you very much, Sasha. We appreciate that very, very much. I remember myself when I was at seminary and I was watching Sasha grow. Of course, Father Paul was very tall, those that knew him, and Sasha inherited that also. And remembering watching him grow and seeing them play basketball is certainly an enduring memory for me. I believe that we have a call. Bobby, I'm sorry I don't see it on the board here, but let's go ahead and listen to or bring up our caller, please. Hi, welcome to Ancient Faith Today. You're on the air.
Hi. Yes, if this is for me, this is Father Stephen Leposki. I was a student at St. Vladimir's in the mid to late 90s. Just would share a very powerful sort of moment for my wife, Daria, and I with regard to Father Paul. Obviously loved being with him in classroom and listening to his stories. I may have fallen asleep in other classes, but never in his anecdotes, and his pastoral ministry really highlighted things. But what Father Paul sort of, if I had to in the next 30 seconds, boils down to for me and my wife is when our daughter Catherine died. She was a stillborn. She was our first child, a honeymoon baby. 9 months sort of to the day after we were married, she was born, but stillborn, and we had funeral service at the seminary chapel. I would just say this, Father Paul, he gave us our life and our marriage back when that happened through...
Bobby, have we lost this call also?
I don't know what's happening.
Uh-oh.
Okay, but you do have other calls lined up, and
all right.
I'm so happy to be on the air right now.
And I'm sorry because I it seems like I can't see anything on the board either, so we're just having a lot of technical difficulties, and we really apologize for that.
Okay, so you do have David, and you also have Father Paul Janikos. So let me know who you want to take.
Let's go ahead. Let's go ahead to Dave Drillock. We're going to be joined now by Professor Dave Drillock. Professor Drillock was not only a classmate of Father Paul's, but later, of course, he was a colleague as they taught and managed the seminarians and the seminary of St. Vladimir's together. Dave, welcome to Ancient Faith Today. Christ is risen.
Indeed, he is risen. Father Thomas.
Hi,
it's good to be here.
Well, it's good to hear you. I know that you're making your way to Father Paul's funeral, which is tomorrow. And so I really appreciate the time that you're taking to be on the air with us and to share your memories. So honestly, I just want to hand it over to you and tell us, because of course you have so many different perspectives. Let's talk a little bit about the early days when you were students together at St. Vladimir Seminary. What was that like, and what do you remember of young Paul Laser at that time?
Well, I remember Father Paul. He came as a student in 1961 to the seminary, and he came with Metropolitan Theodosius, who was already a student at the school, and so there was Metropolitan Theodosius, who was very short, not quite so tall, and then of course tall Paul. Now, the first memory I have of Father Paul, I was a student choir director and assistant to Professor Boris Letkovsky. One of my tasks was to test the voices of the new students and assign them places in the male choir. Father Paul came
Oh, wow.
to the testing experience, and I played a few scales, and he told me, well, he really doesn't have to do this test because he has singing experience, and he is a baritone bass.
Oh.
Well, it so happened that we had no first tenors. And so after I tested his voice and found that he could hit G and A in a falsetto that was as clear as a bell, and there was no weakness there whatsoever, I told him that he was a tenor and that he would be our first tenor. Well, although Father Paul was not at all happy with that decision, he accepted it, and of course, the rest is history. What I appreciated
he had
very
a
much
tremendous voice. He had a tremendous, beautiful voice. I'm surprised when you said he was a baritone because he had a very high voice. So that's wonderful.
Yeah, right, and of course, as you know, the rest is history. Now, I've known Father Paul. We've been very close friends for over 59 years. In fact, Barbara was Lisa's godmother. I remember
Barbara, your wife. Mm-hmm. Barbara, your wife.
Barbara, my wife. Well, yes. She was. She is Lisa's godmother, and the day.
And Lisa is Father Paul's daughter. Just so for our listeners to understand.
Very good.
Yep.
Yes, very good. And we, our family, was in Worcester, Massachusetts. Over the weekend, and the baptism was on Sunday in New Britain. Well, we left plenty of time. We probably should have been in New Britain an hour before the scheduled baptism. Well, at Hartford, we ran into simply stop traffic, and we sat there for over an hour. Father Paul had the baptism prepared. He had a full church of parishioners, and he had them wait for us for almost 1 hour. When we have finally arrived, in calm manner, Father Paul announced to a full church that we will now begin the baptism. And of course, we heard no complaints. Of course, we were apologizing, being so late, etc. But that was sort of the first memory I have of Father Paul in a parish setting where his deportment simply set the parish all the time at ease in what would normally be a rather tense situation.
Exactly. I think that's a real testament to the idea that he had that pastoral background. Of course, as we acknowledged before with Father Alexander, he grew up in Canonsburg, and so that was, a longtime parish, and he was raised by his parents in the church. He got to see all of that. His father was the cantor there. And then being a priest himself, he knew how to handle these situations and pass that information and that experience and wisdom on to his students.
Yes. I mean, that is so true. I remember.
Please go ahead.
Well, when Father Cyril Stavrovsky left the seminary in 1977 to take on a parish assignment, it was the unanimous decision of the seminary administration that Father Paul be invited to move to Crestwood and work full-time at the school. In May of 1977, Father Paul was appointed Dean of Students and Lecturer of Pastoral Theology and Liturgics. Upon hearing of Father Paul's acceptance, I remember Father Alexander Schmemann saying that he could now depart in peace. He reported that the appointment of Father Paul was one of the most promising and joyful events in the history of our school, and he truly believed that this move was the will of God. I remember my office was right next to Father Alexander's, and I remember when he was talking about Father Paul, he was just so delighted that Father Paul had accepted that position. And of course, you know, Father Schmemann was the dean of students at one time at St. Vladimir's when he in the late 50s.
That speaks volumes right there, that he had the confidence of Father Alexander and, of course, later on all of his colleagues and so forth. Dave, I know we only have a couple of minutes before we wrap up and move on. First of all, I want to thank you for taking the time to share these memories. If you could just sum up and say, what impactful thing can you share with our listeners about what you yourself might have learned in watching Father Paul working with the students, your relationship with him as a friend, your families who were friends together? What is that lesson that we can learn from Father Paul from your perspective?
Well, I think the one thing that I learned from Father Paul was that you don't have to force people to do things. That it's much better if you are calm and of course set an example, but not raise your voice. You don't have to raise your voice to get something done. He would he had so many administrative task with the students, and what he was able to get the students to do, it was amazing, and it was because of his the manner in which he was a real pastor, and students simply followed him. You heard the testimony from a student who called in just before I was beginning to speak. Father Paul was not only a teacher at the seminary for the students, and he wasn't an official dean of students, but he was the students' pastor, counselor, protector, advocate, consoler. In a real sense, he was the father at St. Vladimir's. He listened to the students' problems. He encouraged them in their vocations, not only to learn about God and to have faith in Him, and this is really important, but also to trust God, to trust in Him. He prepared so many students for their ordinations to the diaconate and priesthood. He shared in their joys and sorrows. He confessed them. He served at their weddings. He baptized their children. He visited them then when they were ill, making sure that a peer would always look over them and report on their progress. He blessed their rooms, apartments, and homes. And during Thanksgiving, Christmas, and Pascha, if they had no place to go, he and Natasha would invite them to their home. So he was really the father of the seminary.
That is quite a testimony and quite powerful coming from you, Dave, because of course, all of you that were teaching at the seminary, you have such a tremendous influence on so many people. And so I appreciate so much you're taking the time out to this evening to talk about Father Paul and honor him in this way. Wish you all the best. And thank you again for joining us tonight. Thank you, Dave.
Thank you, Father Thomas. Good night.
Good night. We also have another caller that just called in, a former student, and we have Father Richard on the line. Father Richard, welcome to Ancient Faith today. Christ is risen.
Indeed, he is risen. It's Dr. Richard Benton. Sorry about that.
Oh. I'm sorry. Okay, Dr. Richard. Yeah,
no
please share some memories with us.
I'm in good company with lots of fathers. It's an easy mistake to make. I had a great memory of Father Paul in the mid to late 90s. He received both me and the woman who is to become my wife, Holly, into the Orthodox Church. He chrismated me, and the next year he baptized my wife, who had never been baptized. And he did such a wonderful job in teaching us, in pastoring us. And what Professor Drillock said, I have to really take in perspective, because what he did with us, he must have been doing with all the other students, because I remember Father Stephen and the sad event that happened with him that he described a few minutes ago. I remember those times, and what Father Paul did for everybody, for all the students, and how much time he spent with them. And it felt like a big deal to me, and I can only imagine how many other students he was dealing with at the same time. It's incredible. And then that summer after my wife and I graduated from St. Vladimir, my wife comes from Southwest Idaho. There was no Orthodox church, but that's where her family was. And so for our wedding, we flew Father Paul out, and he brought his church in a box. He had a little briefcase with his icon stands and his icons and his vestments. And he said, we'll go to liturgy. We had to go to Boise to go to liturgy on that morning, on Sunday morning. And he says, just drop me off. I'll take care of everything. So we just dropped him off at the hall, and he took care of everything. And he was the most excited of anyone. He said he felt like Cyril and Methodius going to the wilds of Idaho for the Orthodox.
I love that.
And it was such a wonderful time. And you know, even my family who met him only that moment were also sad to hear about his passing, because they remembered his presence and they remembered his kindness and his sweetness. And you know, he was such a pastor, and he just worked tirelessly for the sake of shepherding and of teaching and of taking care of all of us in his care. So I'm just really grateful for Father Paul. I'm sad for his passing, and I'm hopeful in the resurrection.
Dr. Richard, what a wonderful story. You know, it's funny you mentioned about the wedding, because when I was looking at all of these pictures on the internet that various people and friends were showing, and former seminarians, there was always a wedding picture, and he was at it. And I kept thinking, how did he get to all these weddings, you know? And apparently this was quite popular to have him come to your wedding. And from what you say, he was more than happy to do that. So thank you very, very much for sharing that. I really appreciate it. God bless you.
Thank you, Father, for the opportunity. Christ is risen.
Yeah, indeed he is risen. All right. Thank you very much. 1-855-AF-RADIO. That's 1-855-237-2346. If you have a memory to share about Father Paul Laser, would love to hear from you. Next, we're going to play an audio clip of Father John Parker, who's sharing a remembrance of Father Paul Laser. Father John Parker is a former student of Father Paul's, of course, but he himself is now the dean of St. Tikhon's Orthodox Theological Seminary in South Canaan, Pennsylvania. Let's listen to Father John Parker.
Christ is risen. This is Father John Parker, the dean of St. Tikhon's Orthodox Theological Seminary in South Canaan, Pennsylvania. I leave this message in honor and memory of my dear friend and teacher, professor, and confessor, Father Paul Laser, newly departed. Father Paul taught me more than many volumes could contain. I leave for the sake of this beautiful occasion one of his quote-unquote old sayings, which was, always go to church while you can, because there will come a day when you cannot. That's such a simple and profound saying that he shared with us on many, many occasions. And I found myself reflecting on it 1,000 times during this time of confinement of the COVID, because of all the times that I maybe complained or grumbled in my heart about going to church on this or that occasion, and now here we are. Father Paul was a man who dedicated his life to Christ, who dedicated himself to going to church, and suffered so many years because of broken bones and falls and joint replacements and so forth, unable to go to the church services. Nevertheless, because he went morning and evening and in noonday for his whole entire life as a professor and teacher at St. Vladimir's, he held Christ within him. And that's a gift that he gave to me and gives to you.
What a good lesson to know that Father Paul had these experiences that he had built up at St. Vladimir Seminary, and of course near the end of his life. He suffered terribly from Parkinson's disease. He was unable to go to church, but he gives us that witness of the constant remembrance of God built up through decades and decades of his faithful attendance at the church services. Next, we're going to take another guest call, and we're going to hear from Father Paul Giannakis. Father Paul currently serves as the rector of St. Luke the Evangelist Orthodox Church in Palos Hills, Illinois. Father Paul, welcome to Ancient Faith Today. Christ is risen.
Indeed, he is risen. Good to hear from you. Thank you, Father Thomas.
I'm so glad that you're here and mourning our dear pastor and Father Paul. So yes. Tell us a little bit about your time at seminary with him, and share some memories with us, if you would, please. I would appreciate that.
It was really wonderful to listen to everybody speak so far about Father Paul, especially from Father Rentel and Professor Drillock and the others. I think that for many of us who we called ourselves lifers because we were there for 7 years, we went to school there for our undergraduate program, which was done in combination with the programs that they had with Concordia College and with Iona College. But Father Paul was, he was certainly our father in that sense. And I think that a couple of callers have mentioned about how he had this very wonderful presence about him. Yes, he was tall, of course. He could be commanding. I don't ever feel that presence was very demanding or that it was even authoritative. It was always a loving presence. And he was present like this, of course, in the liturgy, in the chapel, for all of the worship services. But as Dean of Students, what I would also add is that he was present in his work with us in a way that many of the other professors couldn't be. So there was a dailiness about his presence with us in the school. Sasha Laser mentioned about him being, there at 7:30 in the morning. It was usually more like 10 after 7. At the very latest, quarter after 7, he was responsible for all of the church services every day, 7 days a week. And then, of course, he was there, doing classes and working with the students. And then he was there for the Vesper services. And then, of course, during the fasting seasons, he was there for the Compline service. So he was with us, interwoven into the fabric of our students, of our student life, from literally from 7 in the morning until 10 or 11 o'clock at night. And I remember many times when I was working as the supervisor of the library building and the educational building, that he would be there at 12 midnight, making sure that everything was locked up. And so I know that his
you could
family,
see the seminary was his whole life. It was consumed.
Yeah, but there was a presence there that was very intimate. And that intimacy that we enjoyed with Father Paul was very much part of our student formation. He was a very warm man. There was never, any fear about being in his presence. He would always listen to you, took the time, in order to hear what your questions were and what your problems were. The other thing that I want to say about him, too, is that he was also very cheerful. He loved to sing. You could speak about anything with him. He was very much educated in so many different fields. But we would speak for hours on Russian literature, on Gogol and Dostoevsky and Tolstoy. He knew these and would weave them again into our lives and into the faith of the church. And that's something that I still carry with me, was that kind of presence. Wherever we were, Father Paul was never far away. There was something very consoling about that kind of presence that he had.
Right.
And then also another thing that I'll just share very quickly was he was a very wise man. There was a lot of certainly learned wisdom. We were being educated, but there was lived wisdom. And he had a lot to share that was practical. He taught practical theology. And I remember him making the comment that for us as pastors and as church workers, that he would say that the devil tempts us with whatever is at hand, with whatever is close at hand, meaning that it can be anything, even in the life of the church, with church music, if that becomes an end in itself, or with rubrics or the typical, and if that becomes an end in itself, or with vestments. I mean, and he loved all of these things, but his point was that, we should never lose Christ, that it's all for Christ, by Christ, and in Christ. And there are these kind of wisdom, little sayings that I've collected over the years from Father Paul but that's my favorite one, because if we think that we're living in the church and we're ministering in the church and that we're not going to be tempted, with what's close at hand, then I think we put ourselves in danger. Yeah.
That's wonderful. I want to go back to one thing that you said, and that is, even though he was very tall and he had this sense of authority about him, it was not an imposing authority. I remember one time, and it only happened once, because I know that I had heard from Father Paul about it, but you had mentioned about matins being at 7:30, and I remember one time I slept in, and he knew right, of course, where my room was in the old building. Went upstairs and I got that knock on the door, and I was sleeping, I was sleeping, and he opened the door and he just kind of looked there in his cassock, and I knew I was in for it. And he said, well, you have to set a better example, and that was it. And, it wasn't, it wasn't personal.
It wasn't punitive. It wasn't demanding or harsh. There was a graciousness about all of it. And that's what I think that's what so many of us were really deeply impressed. I mean, he had to deal with problems, and there were things that happened. Of course, it's a seminary, it's a school. There were very grave things sometimes that happened, and he dealt with them. Not forcefully, but just like you said, he was on top of it, and he was a man full of wisdom and love, and that's what I think we'll miss from him most of all.
Thank you very much, Father Paul. We just have maybe 1 minute left, and we have to move on. I want to thank you very much for joining us this evening. Give us maybe a summation. What lesson do you learn from Father Paul's life? What do you take with you?
So I think that again, that he would always say that as a priest, our lives revolve around the altar and the Eucharist, and that everything flows from it, and everything that we do in our ministry returns to it as an offering to God. And I think in that way, just as I mentioned, it kept the focus of our lives on Christ. And it was because of that focus on Christ that there was this cheerfulness that we mentioned, and this great love and graciousness. And that's what I remember. And all of this, too, in the end, I mean, he was very human. He was just a genuine human being. I mean, Father John Dresko wrote a wonderful little reflection, listing 3 of his memories, and the third of those was that he was so human. He had these interests and recreations. We've mentioned all of them. Song, music, literature, history. So well balanced. But it was that humanness, I think, that is going to be my takeaway.
Thank you very much. We didn't mention the big one yet, and that was the big surprise, and that was his love of Elvis and his singing of Elvis songs, which he did so well. And I remember that was a real shock when we were in the van one day coming back from a church trip where we had sung liturgy, and he kicked back and he put on his sunglasses and he started singing Elvis tunes. And I thought, wow, this is a real human person.
Yes,
This is a real man. You know, he was able to do that, but he did it with great aplomb, and he did it with great class and dignity too. So, Father Paul, thank you so much. Christ is risen. I'm so happy to hear from you, dear friend.
God bless
Take
you
care.
all.
Thank you. Next, we have a phone call from Dr. Bradley Nassif, who also was a student at St. Vladimir's Seminary. Dr. Brad, Christ is risen. Welcome to Ancient Faith Today.
Thank you. Truly, he is risen.
I'm so glad that you were able to join us. Give us your thoughts on this day as we remember Father Paul Laser.
Well, I'll be very brief, and I thank you for this opportunity to share these thoughts. When I got the email a couple of days ago, I read the attachment of his sermon, of his talk about Father Alexander Schmemann, and I dropped everything I did that day, and I gave my full attention to Father Paul, because I remember him as so many have said already, he was an authentic human being, and he was truly authentic, truly human, and also a very godly man. And I guess if anybody deserves to be remembered in our liturgy as a new saint, I would certainly put my voice up for him. One thing I do remember, of course, we always sat down in the refectory, and every time we could talk with him over food, he would be a teacher at all times and was willing to help us understand the liturgy better and a lot of other things. But after Father Schmemann passed away, and then Father John Meyendorff passed away, I was the last doctoral student of Father Meyendorff's, and Father Paul came up with a statement, or rather an attribution, for three great Orthodox theologians in America: Father George Florovsky, Father Alexander Schmemann, and Father John Meyendorff. And Father Paul said that he would like to remember these three as the American theologians. And he compared it to the Cappadocian theologians, the Cappadocian fathers. So his title was, let's remember them as the American fathers. That's better than theologians, the American fathers. So
that's wonderful.
That's what I remember from him, along with most of all his gentle, kind, and loving spirit.
Dr. Bradley, thank you so much for sharing that. We really appreciate those warm memories and thoughts about Father Paul. Thank you so much for calling in. I appreciate it very much.
You're welcome. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Next, we have an audio remembrance by one of Father Paul's former students, one of many of his students, Father Justin Patterson of St. Athanasius Orthodox Church in Nicholasville, Kentucky. Let's listen into his memories.
This is Father Justin Patterson from St. Athanasius Orthodox Church in Nicholasville, Kentucky. I have so many memories of Father Paul Laser. I think my wife and I really always loved the fact that he would never fail to throw a Russian proverb into a sermon, or even like an encouraging word. It always had some kind of Russian proverb. And he even would say it in Russian to those who didn't know Russian, which was very entertaining. I think my most beautiful memory of Father Paul, and I have many, but one that I never failed to forget, is one of my first liturgies. I was standing with Father Paul and one of my good friends who's a priest, and we're holding the air together during the creed. And Father Paul, I think in my memory, he was misty-eyed, but he said, I see my parents, I see everyone I ever loved. He starts naming names, and we're all here gathered together around the altar. And in that moment, like life was right there. We were with Father Paul. And even today, when I serve the liturgy, and especially now that Father Paul has passed on, I see Father Paul there with me. And the unity of the church is manifested in that special and beautiful way. I'll always remember Father Paul Laser for many things, but particularly for that presence in the liturgy that he not only taught us, but imaged for.
Thank you so much, Father Justin. We appreciate it very much. Do you see what an effect one person can have on so many people just by simply being an example of Christ's love, of Christ's life, of service to others? And so we are honoring today Father Paul Laser, who passed away on Saturday. 1-855-AF-RADIO. That's 1-855-237-2346. Next up, we have joining us on the phone, Matushka Masha Solak. Matushka Masha is the daughter of the late Father Thomas Hopko and grew up at the seminary along with Father Paul and his children. I know she brings a special perspective to all of this. Matushka Masha, welcome to the program. Christ is risen.
Indeed, he is risen. Thank you for having me.
Oh, I'm so glad that you're able to join us. And of course, you are connected to Father Paul in many special ways. First of all, because you grew up with his children at seminary in the Hopko household, but also you were able to be with Father Paul at the end of his life after his retirement, because he joined you in the parish there with your husband. So tell us a little bit about your memories and really anything that you wish to share with our listeners.
Sure. Thank you so much. I really have known Father Paul my entire life. He is my godfather. So, from 40 days, he's been part of my life. As Dave Dolac said, he was classmates with himself and my father, Father Tom Hopko. And then after a bit of parish ministry, we did go to the seminary, I think the same year, maybe a year after the Laser family. So in a beautiful way, those classmates were, reunited at the seminary and spent a huge part of their ministry there together. So, first and foremost, he was, one of my father's best friends. And I like to think that they're reunited. So when I moved there around age 9, basically it was we were just a bunch of PKs and kids of professors, faculty kids kind of hanging around together and just being in each other's homes. And, at that point, when you're young like that, you don't really kind of get who your dad is sometimes.
Sure, right.
So we were just, kids growing up together, going to church together. Then we went away, moved to college, and then ended up, many people have been talking about how he was at their wedding. Well, he was at my wedding. many, many weddings that he attended. And then I ended up back at the seminary as a student wife when my husband was a student. So I, got to know him in that arena, seeing him as so many people have talked about how he was dean of students. And
that must have been very unusual for you also to be back in that phase of your life, no longer as the daughter of the dean, but as the wife of a student. That must have been very interesting for you.
Absolutely. It was a little bit of a joke growing up there that you would never be a seminarian wife, and then there I was. But it was so wonderful to have familiar faces, from my own youth to guide us through that time. He was an incredible example of faithfulness, as people have mentioned, being at every church service, and then just the way he extended himself to the lives of the students, both students and married students. Many of us were raising children or having children. He was so available to us as families trying to kind of navigate this life that we were living there. He was always interested in our children. He would bring his dogs outside so the kids could play with them. Just his incredible, he was so available. He was so reachable. He was so personable. He was so, people are saying he was this kind of tall, daunting figure, but at the same time, he was, so just open to all of us. I've been hearing from classmates that we had at that time who are remarking about the same thing and sharing pictures of him, with our children or coming to our events that we would have our families. So, just really, really wanting to be with us and among us.
Matushka, tell us thank you so much for sharing that. Tell us a little bit about the retirement, after the retirement of Father Paul, when he retired in 2007, and then he ended up in your area, and I know he was serving at the parish and so forth. Tell us a little bit about what that was like, and also, if you can share these things, when he began to have this illness and so forth, what did you see there? What did you experience there?
Sure, absolutely. When I was kind of putting together my thoughts for this program, I even, I'm still sort of taken aback that, how did it come about that, my husband and I have been in this one parish, our whole ministry here in Stroudsburg. And, Father Paul and Natasha had their home here well before we were here for many years. And, lo and behold, here we are. And when they retired, become full-time residents here in the Poconos, that, we are their parish home. It's just an amazing kind of act of God's love for us and his providence that, he retired here. What a blessing. We were probably here about 5 or 6 years when he joined our parish sort of full time. In the early years, before his health was poor, he was at every service. He would sing. I have a very small choir, and he would sing as if it was a cathedral. I mean, he would just, it could be a feast day of 5 people, or it could be Sunday morning, and he would sing with the same joy. He would serve, he would preach. We have some Russian-speaking parishioners. He was able to connect with them. So in his early part of his retirement, he was just a vibrant, active member of our parish. We're so grateful for that time. And then we were raising our children again, and he was always interested in our kids, asking how they were doing, wanting to see pictures. They would, their name would be in the paper, and he would call us up and remark about it. So again, just continuing that interest in us, our family, always asking about my siblings and my parents. But yeah, he grew frail, Father Paul. He, had replacement surgeries, and a few years ago he had heart surgery, and then the Parkinson's would take his strength, and part of it affected his speech, because of the muscle control. But the amazing thing was, when he would sing, it would be so clear. We would visit him, bring him communion, and he would always want to sing. It did not matter if he was alert or tired or in a great mood or whatever it was. He would always want to sing, and I love to sing. We grew up singing together, so we would sing anything from memory or not. He always wanted to sing. So my husband was able to be with him the morning that he passed away, and he sang "Christ is Risen" in strong, clear, beautiful voice. So as much as his speech was difficult for him, when he would sing, somehow he could find his voice. So what a tremendous
memory.
Yeah, he had a fall just a matter of months ago. We almost had a running joke with him that he was trying out every rehab in the county, because every time we would visit him, I said, "Okay, what are we doing? Are we trying out every rehab in the county? Is that what you're trying to do here?" And he would laugh, because unfortunately, I'd say, "You know what? You got to stop falling. It's a long way down from your height to the floor." But that was part of his challenge with the Parkinson's and the neuropathy, with having those falls. But he would always kind of joke about it. But he had a recent fall, maybe at the beginning of the year, and he was having trouble speaking. And I said, "Well, let's just sing our conversation." So we kind of joked that we kind of sang our conversation, just a few lines, just to kind of make it funny. But
Well, that's tremendous memory, and thank you for sharing that with us, because that's something that none of us would have ever have seen. Matushka, I know that of course your church is going to be having the funeral tomorrow, and can you tell us what time that's happening? I have posted on the Ancient Faith Today Facebook page the link to the funeral service, which will happen tomorrow, the live stream for that. What time is that happening?
Okay, so it's the service will begin at 10. We're going to try to start around 9:45 with the live link so that people can get situated. It is a YouTube link. If you don't have the link directly from OCA.org or AFR, etc., if you go on YouTube and search Holy Trinity Poconos, that is our handle. I'm not quite sure what you call that. That's our YouTube subscriber name. And you should be able to connect there. We've been live streaming our services just for our small parish, so we're really hoping and praying that it works and is successful. We feel a great blessing to be able to provide this for our greater Orthodox community. Father Paul is in church right now. We received him today, and we will sing his funeral tomorrow. So we ask your prayers for all those listening, and we hope that we can, provide a service that everyone can feel somewhat connected to. We understand that this is such an unusual circumstance to sing away our dear Father Paul in this manner, but with God's blessing and strength, we will go forward with that task. So, well,
many of us will be there praying with you.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Matushka, Masha Solek. Appreciate it very much. God bless you. And we pray that everything goes well tomorrow. Thanks for your time today.
As you.
Also, thank you. God bless you. All right, so we have another audio memory before we take our last guest. We have an audio memory by another former student, Father Christopher Foley of Holy Cross Orthodox Mission in High Point, North Carolina. Let's listen to his remembrance of Father Paul Laser.
This is Father Christopher Foley from Greensboro, North Carolina. My favorite Father Paul story is when I was in seminary and I was on the rotation as a new priest serving a weekday liturgy. So I had studied very hard. I was trying to prepare and be ready for my first liturgy. Father Paul was in the altar watching me and served the liturgy fine. Was feeling good about myself. Father Paul came over and said, "Father Christopher, you did very well." But then the reader finished the Thanksgiving prayers and said, "Father bless." And I realized I had not studied the exclamation for that. And so at that moment, I panicked and I made up a new exclamation, something like, "God be with us in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit." Hanging my head in shame, Father Paul came over to me and said, "Well, Father Christopher, we all must have something to keep us humble." And that's such a great example of Father Paul, how he corrected. I was afraid he was going to come over and just chew me out, but he corrected me in his very gentle way. He knew I was already beating myself up. But I'll never forget that, and certainly will never forget that exclamation. So memory eternal.
What a wonderful memory. And I have memories like that too. I know that some of my classmates, when I was at seminary, will remember a liturgy that a new priest was serving. And I won't even say what feast day it was, but I know that some of us in that 82 to 84 time frame will remember. And the priest said the name of the holy martyrs wrong, and it was quite uncomfortable. And Father Paul, he just was very staid and very calming about all of that situation. So he had his way of being very gentle and correcting people when they needed to be corrected, but not demeaning to them. Okay, next we have another friend and colleague that's calling in. Our final guest tonight is familiar, very familiar to Ancient Faith Radio listeners, Dr. Al Rossi, who also taught with Father Paul for many years at St. Vladimir Seminary. Dr. Al, welcome to Ancient Faith Today. Christ is risen.
Indeed, he is risen, Father Tom. It's really good to be here with you this evening.
I'm so glad that you were able to make it to our program. Tell us whatever memories you have about Father Paul. We've really been having an enjoyable evening reminiscing and hearing all of these accolades, very well deserved by Father Paul. Tell us what's on your heart this evening.
Yes. Frankly, my heart is heavy. I feel like I have a backpack filled with potatoes on my back for the last 2 days. Difficult to get off my chair on the one hand, and on the other hand, great joy that my dear friend is in heaven, my friend of 40 years. Father Paul brought me into the church 40 years ago. He and Natasha were my sponsors then. And I had the good fortune, though I sat on faculty council with him, he was also a dear friend in so many other ways, basically in our home. He was over to our home a lot. In White Plains, he would come Sunday after the Divine Liturgy, have brunch. We would shoot basketball for a while, talk, do things. One little anecdote I want to tell about Father Paul's humanity. My daughter, Beth, was a student at Annunciation, the local Roman Catholic grade school, and she was to do a solo at a film music program. And she told Father Paul, she invited him to be there. And he knew, and she told him that she would be very nervous doing this whole solo. And he was there in his trench coat, standing in the back. Now, when he stood, he was taller than life. And when Beth came on the stage to sing her solo, he told her, when you get anxious, just look at my face. So she had scoped him out and knew where he was. She got to the microphone, looked up, and he was standing in the back, actually strangling himself. He was making this face of, ah! And she broke up. All the anxiety broke, and she was able to sing marvelously. That's the kind of guy he was. He just had this beautiful side to him. Yeah. So many
I'm sure
things,
many of us wouldn't have seen that side of him. So it was wonderful that you saw that, because we saw him as a professor, and we saw him as our kind of acting dean of students, and he kept us in line, and to see that way that he was humorous and put people at ease is wonderful.
Oh yeah. In fact, one time, Father Paul and Father Tom Hopko and I went to a movie. We saw Field of Dreams and did, the men's thing to the movies, and afterwards, he really was a really human being. But I want to add a lovely little tweak on what Masha said, because it was so beautiful. Last night, we had a special ceremony, St. Vladimir's Zoom, where we got together and told anecdotes and stories. And her husband, Father Nick, told that story that she said that he added a very important detail. Father Paul sang Christ is Risen, full voice from behind his mask. And that's a picture in my mind. Father Paul with a mask on.
Wow.
Singing Christ is Risen. I had that picture in my mind in ICU, in the hospital. That's Father Paul. Many of the things he said linger in my mind as lifetime guides and sentences to live by. One of the things he said to me, Al, Jesus said, the path is narrow, and few there are who find it. And then Father Paul added his own words. And as you get older, the path gets narrower. Well, I didn't want to hear that. He didn't want to hear that, but I know that simply was the case. I visited him, many times in his home in the Poconos, and one of the times he was with a walker, and he said, I can't walk from here to there, 10 feet away. It takes me 10 minutes with a walker to go that far.
Oh, my.
And, he fell with the walker. So he knew that the way did get narrow. And the other sentence that lingers with me is that he said often to me, we need to be, I'll quote it exactly, that his master said to him, "Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a little. I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master," from Matthew 25. And that was Father Paul. If you said to me, what do I really want to remember about this guy, is his presence.
Right.
He was like every moment. We're in the present moment. His handwriting, cursive, was so attentive and so perfect and so circular. I still have notes he wrote. I look at my own handwriting, I say, whoa, but Father Paul was just that kind of man. That was his vintage way. Mm-hmm.
That speaks a lot about what he was careful about, just like he was careful in the way that he served liturgy, but he did it in a very natural way, and yet he was very attentive to those details.
Yeah.
Dr. Al, I know that you have a couple of audio clips that you want to share with our listeners. Can we go to those now?
I would love it.
So what would you like to listen to first? I know that there is an excerpt from an interview that you did with him.
Yeah, I'd like to do that excerpt
and then
from the interview. Ancient Faith Radio podcast. I edited for a minute and a half. Can we do that one first?
Yeah, let's do that. Bobby, let's go ahead and cue that up. That's going to be the interview with Father Paul Laser and Dr. Al Rossi. Go ahead.
I can barely walk and I have Parkinson's disease. And I found my life. I was ordained as a priest in 1964. I've been a priest since then for more than 50 years without any change or alteration. I've completed my career actively, but anyway, I try my best at all things. I remember what St. Paul wrote in Hebrews, and this is a favorite quote of Professor Sergio Ascoy. Faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. Not seen. Let us hold fast the confession of our hope without wavering, for he who has promised is faithful. And let us consider how to stir up one another to love and good works, not neglecting to meet together, as is the habit of some, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day drawing near. And Al Rossi, today, you have certainly encouraged me by letting me say these things before you. Thank you.
Father Paul, I am a happy camper with this time spent with you. Is there any last word you would like to say?
My last word is, again, coming from the epistle of St. Paul to Hebrews, chapter 11, verse 1. Faith is certitude about what you don't see. I'm just saying it in my own language now. Things you don't see. One of the most powerful moments in my life where this verse came to mind was on Holy Saturday, when the Lord is entombed yet, during the liturgy of the service, we remember his entombment. While he's entombed, he's able to communicate with us the Eucharistic life, which is the new life of his kingdom given to us already now around his table. Yet he's entombed. What are we seeing there? We're seeing an entombed man giving us life? Yes, that's what faith is all about. You don't see it, what's really going on. He can bring life into death. Even into death, he communicates life. Amen.
Wow.
I love hearing Father Paul speak about death, especially now that he is dead.
Right.
Yes.
He spoke. What's amazing in that excerpt, and thank you so much for playing that for us, and that is the certitude and the power with which he said that quote from Hebrews. You could hear the absolute rock, a solid faith that he had in those words.
Yes, and yes, perfect. And paradoxically,
even though he was in the midst of suffering.
That's right. You could hear his Parkinson's and his suffering. Yes. Mm-hmm. And the faith coming through it. Yes.
Amazing. You have another file, and that is of, I believe, of Father Paul singing. Is that what it is?
Yes. It's a minute and a half that I edited from YouTube. So, yeah, it'd be a great way to end, having him sing liturgically. Mm-hmm.
Wonderful. Bobby, let's go ahead and play that, please.
In the fifth tone, Alleluia, Alleluia, Alleluia. In the night my soul rises early for thee, O God, for thy commandments are a light on the earth. Alleluia, 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 Alleluia. Learn righteousness, you inhabitants of the earth. Now is the hour for praise and prayer. Let us cry fervently to the one and only God. Holy, holy, holy art thou, our God. Glory to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit. We dare to act as icons of thy spiritual hosts, and with our unworthy mouths we cry to thee, O Trinity without beginning. Holy, holy, holy art thou, our God, now and ever and unto ages of ages. Amen. O Christ our God, who though contained within a virgin womb, was not divided from the Father, accept us as we call upon thee with the angels. Holy, holy, holy art thou, our God.
Isn't it amazing to hear him sing, holy, 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 and now he's before the throne of God singing, holy, holy, holy. Dr. Al Rossi, thank you so much for sharing those wonderful memories, that wonderful interview, and Father Paul singing. What a tremendous gift you gave to us, and we appreciate that very, very much. God bless you.
Thank you. What a wonderful gift you're giving to us, Father Tom, by actually having this program done this way with Dave Gerlach and Masha and Father Paul Giannakis and the others. It's so wonderful. Thank you very, very much for honoring Father Paul Laser this way.
He's very deserving. It's our pleasure. All right. We are going to end the program with one last audio remembrance. This is from Father Kirill Sokolov of Holy Trinity Cathedral in San Francisco, California.
There's so much I would want to say about Father Paul Laser and his impact on my life as a child, as an adult, as a priest. But I'm thinking tonight about his premarital counseling for Sophia and me, and how he led us through a discussion of what he called, with a twinkle in his eye, the 5 F's: faith, future, finance, our families of origin, and families of the new kind that come from marriage. And the twinkle in his eye would get particularly wide at that moment. But he led us through a conversation around each of these important topics in life. And I think maybe one of his messages this evening, to me at least, could be, should I be thinking about these things more deeply tonight? Should I be thinking about them more deeply in general? How can I live in Christ to the fullest of my capability, to the fullest of the calling of a Christian? I think he would want his memory to be, in a sense, a sermon to each one of us. And maybe this is one area, or, as he would say, 5 areas where we could spend more time. This is Father Kirill Sokolov from San Francisco, California. Thank you for this program.
How fortunate we are to be able to hear all of the different memories from people that loved Father Paul so much. To close the program, in my own way, I want to say that often when we think of priests that give their lives for the sake of Christ and for the sake of the church, we also forget that they are husbands and fathers. And so as we close this program honoring Father Paul Laser, we want to express our deepest condolences to Father Paul's wife, Matushka Natasha Laser, and their children, Alexander, known as Sasha, Elizabeth, known as Lisa, and Paul, known as Pavlik. We hope that this tribute to Father Paul's work was a great comfort and encouragement to all of you. I want to thank all of our guests for sharing their memories of Father Paul. Thanks to Bobby for manning the calls, to Marcy in the chat room, for everybody that was in the chat room, for those that called in, shared their memories. For all of you who are listening online, please remember Father Paul in your prayers tomorrow as we sing him to the kingdom of God. That's our show for tonight. Remember to like us on Facebook at facebook.com/ancientfaithtoday. Share out our program after that's posted. Give us your feedback and contact us with any ideas or topics that you might want to hear about. Join us next Tuesday evening at 9 p.m. Eastern as we talk to Benedict and Talia Sheehan as we discuss the state of Orthodox liturgical music in America. Good night, everybody.
This is Sacramento Living, a series of podcasts with Michael Haldis about how to understand and live our Orthodox Christian faith in the context of real life and real world issues.
There are things in life we never get. The desires in us grow. We pray, we hope, and we regret and lament why they aren't so. We mask the pain with a smile, saying little pleasantries, dying inside all the while, hoping hopelessly.